We're talking about a system that moved millions of men and completely reshaped an entire subcontinent. It was known by just one powerful name: WENELA.
The story, like so many in this part of the world, kicks off with this insatiable hunger for one thing: gold.
So in 1886, there's this huge gold rush. Suddenly, the mines need a massive, cheap, and constant supply of labor that just wasn't there. So what was the industry's solution? Well, they built a highly organized recruitment machine. First, you get the WNLA in 1901, designed to monopolize recruiting from outside South Africa. Then, a few years later, the NRC is created to handle recruiting from inside the country. The WNLA quickly became known by its acronym. And listen, this wasn't just some company. It was a seriously powerful institution. It had its own depots, its own fleet of buses, even its own airplanes. It would go on to manage this incredible flow of labor from countries like Mozambique, Malawi, Lesotho, and beyond. And in the process, it would fundamentally change the entire region.
The sheer scale of this migration, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around. It wasn't a trickle. It was more like a massive, continent-spanning human river that just flowed for almost 100 years. Let's try to break down some of the numbers.
So over a century, historians figured that somewhere between 4 and 12 million individual men were pulled into this system. Now, that's a huge range, and it just shows how tough it is to track every single person. But even the low-end estimate is just staggering. And you have to remember, these weren't one-off trips. So many men went back for multiple contracts, creating this lifelong cycle of migration that defined their whole lives.
At its absolute peak, which was in 1986, the system employed over 500,000 black mine workers at one time. To put that into perspective for you, that's a workforce larger than the entire population of a city like Atlanta or Miami today. Just imagine that, a whole city's worth of people, all concentrated in one industry, in one place.
Now, what's really fascinating here is you can literally see the ebb and flow of this human river. Look at Mozambique, a total powerhouse, providing up to 100,000 men a year, for decades. Then you see Lesotho's numbers just steadily climbing until it becomes the biggest supplier by the 1980s. And check out Malawi, a huge supplier right up until the 70s, when a recruitment ban just causes its numbers to crash. The key takeaway here is just the incredible scale and longevity of this thing. It was a central pillar of the entire region's economy for a century.
But this incredible flow of labor, it came at an immense human cost. All that mineral wealth pulled from the earth was paid for not just with money, but with the health, the well-being, and often the lives of millions of men.
The dangerous journey to the mines was for many really just the beginning. The dangers didn't stop when they arrived. They got worse. These men were thrown into a harsh, disciplined, and totally alien world, a world of compounds and contracts, so far from everything and everyone they knew.
And this slide, it just brilliantly lays out the core economic equation of WENELA. On one side, for the mines, it was a formula for incredible profit. You've got this rotating, low-cost workforce that keeps wages down, letting them pull gold out of the ground for a huge profit. That wealth then funded South Africa's entire industrialization. But for the workers, a totally different reality. Low pay, a harsh life in these single-sex compounds, and families back home who became completely dependent on the money they sent.
I mean, danger was a constant companion. It was woven into every single part of a miner's life. Beyond the obvious risks of the journey and working deep underground, just living was hazardous. The overcrowded compounds were breeding grounds for disease, and the air they breathed underground, thick with rock dust, led to incurable lung diseases like tuberculosis and silicosis. It's a devastating legacy that continues to this very day.
Okay, so we've seen the individual cost. Let's zoom out to the macro level and see how this system didn't just affect people, but it fundamentally changed the destinies of entire nations, creating two very, very different realities.
In South Africa, WENELA's cheap labor was the fuel in the engine of the economy. Plain and simple. It built the mining industry, which then paid for the railways, the power grids, the cities. But it also built a society based on segregation and deeply entrenched inequality, with townships and hostels designed specifically to manage and control this migrant workforce.
Meanwhile, the countries that were sending the labor, they went through a completely different transformation. Their economies became incredibly dependent on the money being sent home. In a place like Lesotho, this money could account for up to half of the entire country's GNP. But that came at a huge cost. Rural areas were emptied of their men,
which led to a decline in agriculture and a fundamental shift in family and social structures.
Now you might think this is all ancient history. The WENELA system, under a new name, started to wind down with the end of apartheid. But its impact is still profoundly felt all across the region today. The echoes are everywhere.
One of the most direct legacies is the ongoing effort to find some kind of justice for those devastating health consequences. After a huge, landmarked class action lawsuit, the Chamaso Trust was set up. Its job is to track down and compensate former mine workers and their families for the lung diseases they got while digging for gold.
As of recently, the trust has paid out over 2.4 billion rand. But behind that huge number are more than 24,000 families in Lesotho, in Mozambique, Botswana, all over, finally getting some measure of justice. It's this massive, ongoing effort to reckon with the human toll of the system, one family at a time.
And beyond the money and the health issues, the system's impact is written into the very DNA of modern Southern Africa. Over the decades, lots of men stayed, they married, they built families. Today, hundreds of thousands of South Africans can trace their ancestry back to the men who came through WENELA, creating this rich, blended demography that has completely shaped the cultural and linguistic map of the nation.
Which leaves us with a final thought. The story of WENELA, it's not just a relic of the past. Its echoes continue to shape so much of our reality today, from patterns of migration and regional inequality to public health challenges and even questions of identity. It really shows how a system designed a century ago to get gold out of the ground ended up reshaping the very heart of a subcontinent.